This meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant.
New York is crazier than Boston, but it's more friendly than Boston. And it's more open than Boston. And as long as
Really?
as long as you feel safe, I don't mind the craziness. Really, yeah. I mean, New York has people from all over the place, and people are used to being around strangers. Boston's not a very big city, actually, geographically and whatnot, and it's a small world there. Okay, so the symposium. Today, I want to touch a little bit on the intro dialogue, especially the little intro chit chat between Apollodorus and the friend. And normally I spend a lot more time on that, but we've got one night here to really look at the symposium. And the reason I normally spend 2 classes on it, but given that we really got to move on with to the final text of the semester and give that its due, we're going to spend one night here. So I want to focus on 3 speeches on Phaedrus, Pausanias, and Aristophanes, and some of the interesting things they have to say about the main topic of the symposium. And let me first ask, what is a symposium? Because there's 2 meanings. There's a symposium that we have today, like boring academics get together for a boring convention. And then there's the thing that these characters are doing in ancient Greece, which is something much more exciting than what we do today when we get together for a symposium. And it's something derived from, but it's very different, the original. What is a symposium?
Like a banquet kind of.
Yeah, it's often translated as banquet, but I
Okay.
don't think that's actually the best translation. And it's not the literal meaning of the word, because a banquet, you think of like, yeah, you think of having a good time. You think of eating and drinking and being merry, right? A big feast.
Yeah.
But a symposium, the focus is not really food. It's not really a meal. You may eat, and they do eat for a period of time, very briefly at the outset of this thing. But the literal meaning of the word symposium is not banquet or feast or something like that. But it's often translated that way. Actually, unfortunately, because the real meaning of the word is much cooler.
Hi, Professor.
Charity.
Yeah, I think it's a gathering of a group of people, and then there's a subject that they discuss, and then people come out with their opinion.
Okay, good. Yeah, and so that's really specifically what happens here, right? A group of people get together. It's a very cordial, commodious, there's camaraderie and intimacy between these people. They're all friends, right? And one thing we see is the way in which friendship is really enacted between people. Now, not all of these characters know each other equally well, but they're all generally familiar with one another, and they have a basic level of respect and goodwill toward each other that establishes a certain level of a friendly acquaintanceship, if not a full-blown friendship, right? And it's a kind of a get-together where, among other things, one thing you might do is talk and give speeches. Now, that type of symposium where people give speeches is really Plato's vision of a symposium as a philosopher. Now, remember, for Aristotle, happiness literally was the life of philosophy. I know that sounds crazy to people. You're like, what are you talking about? I want to make my money and have a steak and relax and have my kids and have a good time and have a beer. I don't want to do philosophy. That sounds like schoolwork to me. But for Aristotle and Plato, the highest use, your own human nature is defined by your rational faculty. And the highest use of your rational faculty is contemplation of the world, of the way things are, of reality, of the nature of things, of nature itself, right? So for Plato, his depiction of a symposium specifically deals with giving speeches. And certainly a real life historical symposium in ancient Greece absolutely could involve giving speeches. But let's keep in mind for a second that this is a very kind of high-minded, philosophical depiction of a symposium. Anyone want to take another guess at what a symposium is? You're on the right track. A banquet, a get-together where people are convivial, they're happy, they're friendly, they're enjoying each other's company. It's it's a party, right? Let's take a poll. How many people got through a good bit of the reading? Because before I jump and dive into this topic, I don't want to say things unless people know what I'm talking about. How far did we get into the reading? And be honest, because I'll start from wherever we need to start.
Introduction.
Introduction.
Yes.
Other people.
Me too,
Right?
Professor. Introduction, me too. Introduction too.
You mean like the introduction to the whole book, or you mean the introductory dialogue?
Introductory dialogue.
Okay.
That one too. Exactly. There you go.
I'm not penalizing anyone, okay? Because we just had the exam and you've got the rest of the week to do your assignment. That's fine. Okay, so let's go through some of this. Okay, and I want to come back to these speeches. What is a symposium? A symposium comes from the Greek word that literally means to drink. So what is a symposium? It's the thing that you drink at. It is a drinking party. And typically in ancient Greece.
Can you say the bar?
Pardon?
Can you say it's like the bar that you go and drink?
Yeah, well, I
Right.
mean, it's like the bar in the sense that you have the same type of camaraderie. You could have foreign guests show up who you don't necessarily know. But one of the big things about a symposium is it happens in basically kind of like the entertainment / dining room of a Greek home. And it's the male portion of the home. It's called the andron. It's connected with the Greeks were very kind of, you might even say puritanical with their kind of separation of the sexes. And this was like a male bonding party get together. And they could have had a lot of different functions. They could be just friends getting together and enjoying themselves. They could have political implications. You have to understand in ancient Athens, it's a very small world. The city is like 100,000 people. You could fit them all in a football stadium. And normally you'd have like 20 or 30,000 citizens who are of certain, elite background who would be involved in politics. And very often symposia were places where people bonded specifically, around the arena of politics. And so they were creating political alliances. It's something that politicians do today. They go and have dinners, they schmooze, they make connections, they grease the skids for their career or some ambition they have, whether they're running for office or they have a bill they want to introduce and promote, things like that. Let's skip down. So typically, symposium centered around wine, drinking wine, and rituals connected with wine. Not only do they have a drinking party, but they'd often have like drinking games, not unlike a fraternity type party, or a house party. You guys have house parties, people play drinking games, stuff like that. Some of the things that were typically included were wine, music, sex, and speech. All these things that are appealing to different people at different times in different ways, and that people desire. One of the funny things about Plato's depiction of this symposium is that the musicians are sent away. They make some references to sex, but there's no actual sexual conduct that is described anyway. This night, they actually drink a little bit of wine, but they talk about the night before, the host, who is named Agathon. He's a tragic playwright, and he's won a very prestigious award that's basically like winning an Oscar for like best director, best screenplay type thing. So he's won this major theatrical award that is awarded to tragic poets, which is what he is. And the night before, they had a big party to celebrate his victory, and they got basically really shit-faced. And then this night they say, oh, geez, we really drank a lot last night. I don't really need to drink that much. They drink a little bit. They acknowledge that they're allowed to drink whatever they see fit, and that they can drink voluntarily rather than involuntarily. And it sounded like the night before they drank involuntarily, which meant they didn't have a choice about it. Like if everybody drank, they had to drink too. So they don't really drink much. And then the focus becomes, you might say, the Greek word logos, speech and reason, right? I mean, this is the focus of the philosopher, the use of our reason. Question: what do they give speeches about? Each character there, or at least, well, each character that we're told about gives a speech on a topic that they've all agreed upon, and they decide to have a competition, which is also not uncommon in a symposium, to have competitions, normally ones that would involve drinking, about who can give the best speech on this topic. What is the topic that they choose to speak about? What do they choose to speak about?
Just about Eros.
About what?
Eros.
Eros. Eros. Okay.
That love.
Okay. So that's my next question. What the heck is Eros? So we'll start out with love. If you look in the text, every time you see the word love with a capital L, that's actually in Greek, that's eros. And if there's one thing I wish this text had done, is to have just left that word in Greek as eros, because it turns out that they mean a lot of different things by this word, and it's a little bit complicated. Okay, it's not too complicated. It's just a little bit complicated, because this word eros can refer to two related things, but they're not perfectly identical, and we need to clarify it. And even the way they speak about eros, it confuses the two, but you'll see what it is and you'll understand. Let me just go back to something that was provided for you looking at Plato's Republic. So Plato is famous for his what is called his dialogue form, right? He has this Socratic method. If you want to talk about the Socratic method of understanding or teaching or critical thinking or comprehension, it comes from the Platonic dialogues and the way Socrates carries out discussion in the Platonic dialogues. And the Symposium is one dialogue that is notably different, because for the most part, it actually doesn't have dialogue. When we talk about dialogue, we talk about people back and forth in conversation. Dialogue, literally two people back and forth, right? And the special term that Plato and Socrates give to this special form of philosophical conversation is dialectic. And to be honest, dialectic is just a fancy word for dialogue. But think about it. Monologue is where one person is speaking by themselves. Dialogue is where you have people speaking back and forth. And what do you get when people speak back and forth? They have question and answer. And so in the Republic, which I'm sure everybody has forgotten now, right? One of the basic question of the Republic was what? What was the central theme of the Republic? Does anyone remember? What were they concerned with? What topic?
Justice.
Very good, right?
Justice.
Because justice, this is really interesting. And why did they care about justice? Which is to say, doing right versus wrong. And we talked about Cephalus, the old man who was concerned to do the right thing. He became, at his old age, concerned to do the right thing. Generally speaking, why did, if you can remember, why did Cephalus become so concerned to do the right thing? Remember, he was making all those sacrifices out back. And he started talking about becoming an old man and getting near the end of his life and the stories about heaven and hell and things like that. They call it Hades in Greek, but it's hell. It's the same concept pretty much. Okay, that's fine. He was concerned about his own happiness. And therefore, because he was concerned about his own well-being, his own happiness, he was concerned with justice, because justice, what does it do? There's a set of rules and it metes out rewards and punishments throughout society. Like when you kill people in the subway, you get arrested, and then the punishment is before you maybe even you're not found guilty, but you got to put up bail for $1 million or whatever it is. That's a kind of a form of a punishment for what you've done or supposed to have done. I guess technically in the legal system, it's not actually a form of punishment, but it has other functions to it. Anyway, so, rewards and punishments of justice have a direct impact on our life, right? So the question in the Republic became, what is justice? And Socrates, people give an answer, and then Socrates critiques them, and then they revise their answer, and they try to develop a full understanding of what this thing is. And that's called dialectic, where you use a question and answer process to move from an initial opinion about something to basically a better understanding of it, to true knowledge of it, as opposed to an opinion, because an opinion is just a belief, right? So in the Republic, we have this concern for justice. It's connected with the public good. Of course, the public good is the public happiness, and that also affects our individual happiness, relationship between the common interest and the individual's interest. In the symposium, we have a drinking party about private matters, dealing with private relationships, in which they give speeches in praise of Eros. Question: what exactly is Eros? We said it's love.
Mhm.
Can we say anything more than Eros is love? Okay, really important.
Passion.
Pardon?
Passion.
Passion. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay, erotic love. What do we mean by erotic love? Are we talking about sex? Okay, good. So lurking within Eros is, we would call it erotic love to distinguish it from other types of love. Very good. And commonly, even in our use of this word Eros, and also with the Greeks, and also within the context of this dialogue, very often Eros is referenced to sexual desire. Absolutely. Now they make very clear, all these men giving these speeches, they make clear that it doesn't necessarily have to refer exclusively to sexual desire, but it certainly can and often does, right? So let's step back a second. Before eros means love or desire or sexual desire, right? It refers to a god in the Greek pantheon, right? He is the son of Aphrodite. Who, does anyone know who Aphrodite is? Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty, right? She has a son. His name is Eros. He's not the love of God. He's the god of love. Farah, just to reverse it. He's the god of love, right? What do we all know Eros as on Valentine's Day? You guys actually know who Eros is.
Cupid.
Yes, he's Cupid. And what does he do? He goes around with his bow and arrow and makes people fall in love, right? Okay.
Yes.
So one of the basic ways to understand, so what is this God? And this is what the Greeks do. It's something different than what we do in our monotheistic vision of the biblical God. These gods and goddesses are personifications of things. They're anthropomorphizations of, in this case, love, right? And you'll notice in all these speeches, these characters in some ways have very different ways of understanding what love is. Very often, these characters characterize love as a feeling felt between people. The speeches we're going to look at are going to be the speeches that focus on love being treated as a feeling between people, a feeling of attraction, a feeling of desire, an emotion that we all are perfectly familiar, at least I think most of us are perfectly familiar with. However, there are other characters, like the doctor. It starts with the letter E. His name is actually pronounced, and has an X in it, Arisomachus. Arisomachus, his speech is the third speech. And in fact, when he talks about eros, as opposed, and I use that word instead of love for a moment, he talks about like a cosmic force of attraction that like draws the water from the clouds down to the earth, to the dry earth. And it's almost like he's talking about a cosmic force, like a law of nature, like gravity or something, as opposed to something we recognize that happens between human beings or among other things. So typically, but not always, when we think of eros, we're thinking of a feeling of intense desire or of yearning or longing. Sorry about this, not for a think. That's like something in Dr. Seuss, for a thing or person, right? And then more specifically, under that umbrella, it could be erotic or sexual desire. Absolutely. And so all these speakers are trying to characterize their understanding of eros, right? One of the biggest things you're going to see in a distinction between these characters is between body and soul, right? There is love based on the body, and there is love based on the soul. And love based on the body is going to be connected with, what do we think it's going to be connected with? Love of bodies results in what? It ain't complicated. Yeah, let's use the word sex. Sex. Love of the soul. And of course, but actually, Ashley, that's very good. Physical pleasure, because now we're connecting. There are all these connections with Aristotle's discussion of philia, right? Friendship based on pleasure, which may well be a form of eros, right? And I'm going to ask everybody in a second, you might not have a perfect answer, the difference between philia and eros. Because guess what? In English, they can both be translated as love, right? So what would, okay, love of the body would be like, you find them beautiful, right? You know, obviously anybody you're in love with, you're not going to find ugly. That's one of the interesting topics that's raised here, the issue of beauty. Anything that you love, you're going to find beautiful. You might find it or them beautiful or it beautiful. Another person may not. What would love of the soul look like? If love was based on the soul rather than the body, how might you characterize that type of love? If we were talking Aristotle, we just had the midterm, and we were talking about love based on the soul or of the soul rather than the body, which of the three forms of friendship comes most readily to mind?
Complete friendship.
Complete friendship, absolutely. And for 500, why is that? Why would that be a good guess?
Because love of the body is related to pleasure.
Okay, and what makes complete friendship connected with love of the soul?
It is related to virtue.
And where does that kind of virtue reside? In your body or in your soul?
Moral, soul.
Yeah, right. Remember, so let's step back. I mean, complete friendship is a type of love or friendship between two people who are virtuous, who perform virtuous deeds for each other. And it also has something to do with the way in which they care for or love each other. They love each other as an end in themselves. What did we mean when we said that in complete friendship, each person loves the other as an end in themselves, rather than a means or a tool? Let me ask this. Rukeya, you're pretty close. What do you care about in the lower two forms of friendship for Aristotle? In utility and pleasure, what's your primary concern in that relationship?
Being useful.
What being useful? If you're in that relationship, what is your objective? What is your goal? To get what?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Happiness.
Too big, too much. If I'm in a relationship of utility, what's my goal to get?
My means meant, I guess, or satisfied.
Yeah, your needs met. And your needs in that type of relationship have nothing to do with needing the other person for themselves. You just need what they give you, and that's something separate from them, as Aristotle understands it. Yeah, it could be a favor. In the relationship of pleasure, he makes clear his conception of it is you're not primarily concerned for the other person for who they are, their soul, their character, their virtue, because they might not be virtuous and it doesn't matter. You're just concerned for the pleasure you can get from them, whether they're witty and they're the class clown, or whether it's physical pleasure of some kind, or whether they just look nice and you take them out as a handbag and show them off, right? You don't really want to talk to them. You don't want to know about their brain because they don't have one. They just look cute. And they're a handbag. They're an accessory, right? On a night out. Right? So love of the soul would absolutely be complete friendship because you would be in love with themselves. And for Aristotle or Plato, Socrates, the self is, what you really are is your soul. That's what you are more so than your body, because that's where your kind of identity resides, right? Your body's a hunk of meat. It's the animal part of you, but your soul is where resides the distinctly human part of you. Okay. There's something really interesting here. So you have a whole bunch of things at a symposium normally that have a type of erotic power, of intoxication, right? So where do I have it? It's here. Eros is treated as a kind of a drug, right? And Eryximachus talks about alcohol, and he talks about having the right amount of alcohol can be enjoyable, but having too much alcohol can be bad for you. And a pharmakon, it's a Greek word. It's where we get our word pharmacy. And this word is used in Eryximachus talking about what they're going to speak about that night and how much they're going to drink. And a pharmakon is a drug that can either be medicine or a poison, depending on how you take it. And it's kind of an intoxicant, and that affects your emotions. There's typically at a symposium, you have all these different, I'm going to call them drugs. There's drinking, that's obviously literally a drug, but then there's also things like music, sex, food, and in this case, speeches that can affect you emotionally. Because when we think of eros, as opposed to philia, we think of an emotion and an intense feeling, almost of intoxication. And I think there's a clear kind of relationship established in this introductory dialogue between alcohol as a drug and eros as a drug. And both of them can be incredibly enjoyable, but they also can be problematic depending on how they are used. Let's put it that way, right? And obviously we can see that in the same way that justice is connected with our happiness, because justice metes out rewards and punishments. We want rewards and we want to avoid punishments. So that has an immediate impact on our own well-being. Obviously, eros, love, has a direct impact on our potential happiness. So I want to read in just a second, and I want to ask this question. What then is the difference between philia, Aristotle's discussion of friendship, and eros, given that they both can be translated as love?
Philia is more of a platonic kind of relationship of a
You know,
friendship.
that's good. First of all, you have to tell everybody, what do you mean by here we're
Oh,
reading
sorry.
Plato. What is a platonic relationship?
So a platonic relationship is where it's merely just friendship. You don't want anything underlying it, no sexual favors or any sort.
Well, you may want all kinds of stuff, but like
Well,
platonic implies you want their soul, not their body, something like that, and only their soul.
right.
Something I think that's how Plato would put it.
Only their soul. Okay. Yeah.
Can you have a sexual relationship and it still be part of philia?
At first I would have said no, because I'm thinking on the lines of like brotherly love, or true friendship. And
Now remember, brotherly love is literally Philadelphia, right?
Okay.
Philia is just love,
okay.
right?
So maybe I would say maybe no.
What do other people say? Luis, what do you say? Can you have a sexual relationship under this concept of philia?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say absolutely, right? I mean, it's part of friendship based on pleasure. I mean, Aristotle is pretty open, talking about young people getting the hots for other people, and one day they have the hots for this person, the next day they have the hots for that person. Actually, Pausanias is going to pick up what he calls vulgar love, which is really, he's talking about sex and sexual attraction. So let me ask this, is philia an emotion? Now, when we think of love, we could be thinking of an emotion. Is philia an emotion towards something? Which is to say, I have a desire for X. That's an emotion an emotional attachment towards something.
Yes.
Philia, we didn't talk too much about this issue, but Aristotle says some interesting things that let you know how philia is different from eros. Somebody picked up on it at some point. Can you have a friendship, philia? Can you have a friendship with the glass of wine?
No. Hey,
No, you cannot.
At all.
The question is, why not?
Because it's an object.
Yeah, and what do you need to have philia? That's absolutely correct.
Another person or
Yes, and why do you need another human being to engage in this thing called friendship or philia?
So you can talk about just your personal stuff to them or about something.
I don't disagree with you, but that's very specific. There's a big general answer as to why.
an exchange of just thoughts and ideas.
Yes, well, let's just leave it at exchange or reciprocal or mutual relationships. You can have a mutual relationship with another human being. What does mutual mean? I give to you, you give to me. Right? I
Do
can
the same
talk
thing to
you.
each other.
I'm sorry?
Do the same thing for each other. What I
Well,
do to you, you do to me.
well, doing something. You know, he says something in the ethics. He says, like, you can love the wine, but the wine can't love you back. Right? So what is he establishing there? That philia is something that has to be reciprocal. And you can only have a reciprocal relationship with a human being,
yes.
right? Because only they are able to return to, first of all, identify your affection. Remember, he talks about affection has to be noticed by the other person. The wine does not notice that you like it, right? And of course, what are the challenges of some relationships? The other human being doesn't even recognize what you think or feel. And that's going to be one of the problems in a relationship like that. Okay. So philia is a reciprocal. We might say it's simply this, that philia is really a love relationship and that it is a reciprocal one. And whenever Aristotle uses that word philia, he's really talking about a relationship between two people, right? Eros is not the same thing. Eros is the thing you all know as love, that sense of desire, that sense of longing, that sense of yearning for something. And eros does not have to be eros for another human being. You can long for music. You can long for a glass of wine. You can long for speeches. You can long for knowledge and understanding. That's like the philosopher, right? The life of contemplation is a longing, a deep erotic desire for understanding of things. And when you look at Socrates' speech, which we're not going to focus on, that's what Socrates seems to be interested in. He says, I don't love beautiful things. I love the idea of beauty itself. And I want to have understanding of the concept of beauty or the idea of beauty in and of itself. I don't love individual people who are beautiful. I just love the beautiful with like a capital B. And you're wondering, like, what the heck is he talking about? Okay. So erotic desire can be for all different types of inanimate things, things that don't love you back, right? You can have, you could even stretch it and say eros could be a kind of addiction. Like you could have an addictive passion for drinking or for drugs or for working out or whatever it is. Could be anything. And eros is specifically identified with a feeling of deep desire, right? Very different from philia, especially when you look at complete friendship. Obviously, you're going to enjoy yourself in complete friendship, but you notice that Aristotle doesn't focus on emotions at all in explaining the nature of that relationship. Here, emotions are really at the center of it. Okay. Let me go back to these three guys. Phaedrus, Pausanias, and Aristophanes. These are three characters who all conceive of love in relationship to love of other human beings, as opposed to things like wine or music or whatever, right? And what they want to clarify is the nature of this desire, what you really want from it, and also its effects, what it results in. And the one thing they're all keenly concerned with is that there's a fundamental relationship between eros and human happiness, right? Eros is a deep longing or yearning for something. What's going to make us happy in relationship to our desire for a thing? What's going to make us happy? If we desire something, we what? We what? What's going to make us actually happy, though? You might think. Actually blank. Do you just want to desire the thing? Or do you actually want to?
You want to get it.
Yeah, you want to get it. You want to get it, right? If you're somebody who likes sex, you don't want to just yearn for sex. You want to have it, right? And then there are consequences for obtaining what you have sought, right? So all these characters are going to have a different conception of what love, how love really manifests between people, or what it really is about. What it really is about. Let me go back to the beginning here. You know what? I am going to skip the introductory dialogue for now. But it's something you should read. Let me put it this way. There are all these people in like the circle of Socrates and his buddies. And some people like Apollodorus and this friend who's a businessman. What does a businessman love? Yeah, money. Why do they do business? Because they want to make money. Now, I'm sure many businessmen, they love the actual work they do and so on and so forth. But we need to think a kind of generic conception of a business person is they do what they do because they want to make money, because they love or deeply desire money, maybe even for its own sake, right? So there are all these characters. They were not at this symposium. The symposium happened like years ago, right? And they talk about the fact that it didn't happen recently and that Agathon doesn't even live in Athens anymore, which is where the symposium takes place. And they all want to hear the story about their speeches on love or eros. And basically what you're talking about here, you know, we talked about the gossip theory with Sapiens, right? They want the gossip. They want the dirt. You know, the juicy stuff about what was said about eros by all these luminaries who were at the symposium. And so all the characters depicted here were actually historical figures in ancient Greece. It's not to say that these speeches are a reconstruction of what they literally said, but there is a basic acknowledgement that these people did get together. And I mean, Plato has invented these speeches, right? But all the characters are actual historical figures who were kind of movers and shakers in Athenian society. They were like the great kind of intellectuals of the society, the great poets and political figures and so on. And so everyone wants to know what they had to say about eros, which could mean love, it could mean desire, it could mean sex, right? It kind of covers a lot of bases here. And the character at one point asks, did you learn about all the speeches from Socrates? because he's the main character and he was at the symposium and he obviously gives a speech toward the end. And the guy says, oh, God forbid, Socrates would never talk about this. And one of the problems they have is like they want the juicy gossip, but they're having a tough time getting the real story. And it's not something that's like openly discussed. Any thoughts about why these speeches on love / sex / desire would not just be like broadcast publicly? And that it's actually hard for them to learn the gossip about what was really talked about? Any thoughts about why that might be the case?
About intimate.
Intimate?
Yes.
Yeah, why don't you run with that a little bit? You want to say a little more about that? I agree. You're on the right track.
Yeah, it's like when people are in love with each other, they want to keep it. Sometimes they want to keep it a secret between.
Okay, absolutely. What was the first part that you said?
When they are in love.
Okay, when people are in love or issues with love, they don't broadcast it to the world, right?
Yeah, they want to keep it.
They don't talk about the intimate details of their life, except in very rare instances with the right people in small numbers, right? Not like the whole world, not on Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's something about love and sex that because of the nature, I mean, on one hand, it's really obvious, but on another hand, it's not. I mean, it's obvious our reaction that we understand this is a private issue. And it's not something you just, well, I don't know, in the internet world, a lot of it does get spilled out there and people have, but I think the average person, it's a private matter.
Oh, yeah.
What is this thing about eros? And I just want to use that word all encompassing to include love, desire, sex, the whole ball of wax. What is it about eros that makes us keep it a private, almost secret, behind closed doors type of issue? What is it about it that makes it so personal and private? That's kind of a question being raised here. And I'm certainly not saying that there's anything wrong with that, because I think that's how most societies operate, that it's something behind closed doors. The question is why? Any thoughts? Would people feel uncomfortable? Yes. Would people feel jealous about discussing these kinds of things openly? I think so, yes. Would people find it inappropriate? Yes. And then the question is why? And in the interest of time, I have a kind of simple answer. Because obviously eros is one of those things that sits at the center of everybody's life. And remember, eros for one person is different for eros for another person. But it's like that most intimate, I think each character is talking about what they think is their most intimate passion, right? And the particular thing about eros is it's very, very powerful. And it's a very powerful emotion. We've moved on from Aristotle here. Now we're talking about emotion, something that everybody kind of can sink their teeth into, not talking about like rational activity all the time. When you have a human emotion that's so powerful, that can be both positive but also destructive, what do you need around it? What does society need around this powerful impulse?
Protection.
I'm sorry?
Protection.
Protection? Yeah, and I'm thinking of rules. Absolutely. if you ask yourself what makes love and sex sexy and so powerful, is because it's not just something that's exchanged like buying a latte at Starbucks. The rules surrounding it build up this tremendous mystique, especially because it's a feeling that is the rules keeps in a kind of box in a certain way, and it doesn't allow you to express it at every turn. There are appropriate venues and expressions, and the unleashing of that feeling or that desire is kept off stage of society behind closed doors. Because I don't know, if it were unleashed in public, I don't know, you'd be looking at Hobbes' like world of the state of nature where everybody be at each other's throats. Like it needs to have strictures around it and taboos, right? There are certain things that are considered forbidden, right? That actually make one's desires even more intense, because the prohibitions put on our desires actually amplifies them in a certain way. So this is going to be one of the interesting themes of some of these speeches, the moral codes that surround this intense thing called eros. Okay. So let's go very briefly to the speech of Phaedrus. Could I have a volunteer read for us?
Where's the reading, Professor?
Oh, you know what? How about I bring it up? That would help. There we go.
Where do you want to start?
Right from the beginning there.
Okay, hold on. It says, love is a great God, wonderful in many ways to gods and men, and most marvelous of all is the way he came into being. We honor him as one of the most ancient gods, and the proof of his great age is this: the parents of love have no place in poetry and legend. According to Hesiod, am I saying it right?
Hesiod.
Okay, Hesiod, the first to be born was chaos. Sorry, I'm walking. But then came Earth, broad-chested, a seat for all, forever safe and love.
Okay, let's pause for a second. So remember what they decided to do. The competition is speeches in praise of Eros. Eros is a god. When you make a speech in praise of Eros, or when you make a speech in praise of God, what kind of speech would you call that? A speech in praise of a god?
Great.
I'm sorry?
A prayer?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so when you make a prayer to a god, you speak in a respectful way. So how does he start? He makes the obvious praise, love. See, it's Eros, right? It's referring to Cupid. Cupid is a great god. And here he does this riff on an origin myth told by Hesiod, who is one of the two famous Greek poets along Homer and Hesiod, the two H's. And he gives an origin myth of the world in his what's called his Theogony. And here he says the first thing that came into origin, mean like the origins of all things. Like this is the Greek equivalent. Everybody knows the first line of the Bible, the Old Testament.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yes, thank you very much. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, or the heavens and the earth. Absolutely. This is the Greek version of that story. In the beginning, there was chaos, and chaos is like disorder, but also void. And then from chaos, from nothing, right? You know, apparently God starts out with nothing, and then he creates heaven and earth. From the chaos came earth, broad-chested, a seat for all. And I think, what do they mean by broad-chested? You think about your broad chest. I think what they're talking about is like the horizon. I think that's the reference here. At earth and love. So instead of heaven and earth, it's love and earth. And what's the idea here? Even in the Old Testament, the primordial elements of the cosmos are heaven and earth, and everything created is some mixture. And if you know your first 3 chapters of Genesis, you know that Adam, the second time he's created, is created from the earth, and then God breathes his divine breath into him. So he's this mixture of heaven and earth. So here, love sits at the beginning of time. And you notice here clearly, this is a force that's beyond just the emotion we feel, right? This is like a cosmic force or even a cosmic element that's there in the beginning of all things, right? So what greater place could he put love at the beginning of all things? Who was reading before?
Me, Farah.
Farah, are you able to read, or should I call on Rukeya?
You can ask somebody else. I'm walking. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, Rukeya, you want to pick up for us?
Yes, Professor, I can.
Awesome.
Okay. But then came Earth, broad-chested, a seat for all, forever safe and love. And Aquisilos agrees with Hesiod. After chaos came Earth and love, these two. And
Parmenides.
Parmenides tells of this beginning. The very first God designed was love. All sides agree then that love is one of the most ancient gods. As such, he gives to us the greatest goods. I cannot say what greater good there is for a young boy than a gentle lover, or for a lover than a boy to love.
Okay, let's stop for a second. Does everybody see something very funny going on here? So we start about love is this ancient force in the cosmos, there at the beginning of the creation. And he says, God, it's one of the greatest gods. He gives the greatest goods. And then in the very next line, he says, I cannot say what a greater good there is for a young boy than a gentle lover, or for a lover than a boy to love. Anything missing there? There's this completely abrupt transition from like in the beginning to a depiction of love between two human beings now, right? Now we have love, not as a cosmic force, but love as an emotion felt between two people. But of course, he's still framing it. I mean, we still have this cosmic concept of love as like a cosmic force, but I suppose as we get older, we kind of like don't buy it so much, like people who are destined to be with one another, a kind of Romeo and Juliet, or Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet on Titanic and stuff like that. Has anybody seen that movie?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen it. I hope to go to my grave having not seen it. Because everybody saw it. It's hokey. What is he talking about? This older man, younger boy, lover. What is he talking about here? Anybody know? Because this is a big topic for the first 2 speeches. Okay, if you read the introduction to the whole book, there's a discussion of a certain type of relationship between an older man and a younger boy. And the younger boy is like a teenager on the verge of becoming an adult. And this type of relationship was not completely sanctioned by Greek and Athenian society, but it was generally sanctioned. And actually, I think Plato has criticisms of this relationship for reasons that we could all understand about the problems of an older person being with someone who is significantly younger than them to the point of being too young. Anyway, let's state the obvious. These guys who are explaining what they think love is, you know, when they say they're praising Eros, they're explaining their understanding of love. So when they explain it from their point of view. And not only they explain it from their point of view, they explain it from the point of view of what they like, right? Because why wouldn't they? And what is Phaedrus apparently into? He's in this relationship between an older man and a younger boy, and he is an older man himself, not like ancient, but like a middle-aged man, right? So in Greek society, there was, I say authorized, accepted to some degree, this relationship between older man and younger boy. It's not quite a gay relationship as we or homosexual relationship as we understand it today, because men in Greek society were obliged to have wives and families and children. Anybody know why?
Procreation.
Yes, because society needed children. And if you come from like an elite family, you need to reproduce to perpetuate, you know, effectively the dynasty. And you have to understand, like, this is like 5th century BC, before modern medicine. It's a small society. Societies can be destroyed in a blink of an eye. So all men, regardless of their sexual inclinations, had to be married and procreate. One thing they could not do was to commit adultery. This was like a very serious crime in this society, partly because they wanted to maintain the integrity of the family, right? They had prostitution as an acceptable outlet. And then the other thing they had was this male-male relationship. So one part of this relationship is definitely lust, sexual desire, right? The other part is that Pausanias is going to claim that this relationship can be a kind of mentorship, that through love of an older man for a younger boy, that the older man can mentor the younger one and like bring him into elite society, and like prepare him for like a kind of cutting edge political life, which would have been the primary kind of MO, the primary goal of anyone from an elite family. Like what you don't go off and like go to business school and create a big business. What you do is you get in contact with the right people and you get involved with politics because you want to advance your ambitions. And the place you do it in ancient Greece is in politics. Okay, important thing. There's a lover in this relationship and a beloved. And it's different than, it's certainly different than complete friendship, because the older man is the lover, and the beloved is the object of his desire, the younger man. And the idea is that he loves them because he's young and beautiful, right? Physical attributes, but there could be other things. Okay. So he's going to say here in the next line that there's a certain guidance that a person needs in order to live well. So what is he going to say? Just like Pausanias, that the older man can provide guidance to the younger person. Let me just read this, and then Ruqayyah, I'll have you pick up. It says, there is a certain guidance each person needs for his or her whole life if he is to live well, and nothing imparts this guidance, not high kinship, not public honor, not wealth, nothing imparts this guidance as well as love. So there's three concepts here that are interconnected, that are really important, that set up every other speech going forward, right? There's this concept of living well. There's a concept of guidance, and there's the concept of love. When Plato, or when Phaedrus here speaks of living well, to live well, what is he really talking about? No, not love, because love is love. That's one of the other things he talks about. There's a relationship between love on the one hand and living well on the other. They're connected, but they're not the same thing. So Rukeya, this friendship could be friendship based on pleasure. Absolutely, that's a good connection. They're not always going to describe it that way, though. It could be something else as well. To live good, well, technically good is an adjective and living is a verb, so you need an adverb, which is well, living well. What are we talking about when we're talking about living well? We're talking about the good life. What is the good life? Yes, Rukeya said it. When he talks about living well, he's talking about happiness, right? What matters for a human being? Happiness. That's what we all care about. The question is, what is it and how do we achieve it? That's the murky part, right? That's the same issue we dealt with Aristotle, that challenge. We all want to live well. Well, if we're going to live well, we need guidance. True or false? He says we need guidance. Is that true?
Yes.
Why is it true? Why do we need
Because
guidance?
to live a happy life, we need motivation, and someone can guide us and can give us motivation so that we
Okay,
can.
we need motivation. What else do we need? I think there's one other thing that's equally as important. I mean, we're all motivated to be happy, right? The general average person is motivated to be happy. What else do we need beside motivation? What does guidance imply? Guidance is a little bit different from motivation. He could say we need a certain motivation in order to be happy, but he says we need guidance. Yes, we need help, but what kind of help do we need? Yes, so help is a synonym for guidance, absolutely. Guidance, directing us through life. Very good. I hope people can speak out loud. I mean, I like the comments, but everybody is nice to, I don't know who's looking at them beside me. So to be happy is synonymous with taking that right path in life. Remember this image of the path going back to Cephalus, right? He's on a journey toward the end of his life. And I mean, the end of his life is not just dying. The end of his life is achieving what he wants to achieve, the telos, the goal. The goal is to be happy. And to live well, we need guidance to do the right thing, whatever the right thing happens to be, right? Without getting into the question of what the quote right thing is. But we need to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing. And the problem is we don't always know what the right thing is to do. We need guidance. So what is he saying? He says that a love relationship with another human being can provide us guidance. True or false? Rukia says false. Why? All depends on what kind of love it is, right? If we're talking about pure sexual desire, you might be right. But he doesn't necessarily mean that. People don't think that love for another human being can help provide us guidance in order to be happy. Okay, it's true and false at the same time. It depends on what type of your desire you're talking about, correct? Do we all agree with that? Okay, I think that's what's lurking here. That's very perceptive, right? I think we're going to say, just like Plato would, that impulsive desire, raw sexual desire, untutored, untrained, undisciplined, that's not going to be good guidance for to achieve our happiness. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with sex, but if that's your sole perspective, like that's not going to work. However, definitely some higher form of love where, I mean, look, a higher form of love is going to look a lot like complete friendship. Let's not lose sight of that. Complete friendship is all about the two people working with each other to make each other a better person and being concerned enough about the other person to actually invest in making the other person better. And it's mutually beneficial, right? Well, let's see. Now that you've all said this, he's going to explain exactly the type of guidance he's talking about. It's very interesting. And we can see whether what he says is true. Rukia, can you keep going for us?
Yeah, so Professor, I'm starting from what guidance do I mean, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so what guidance do I mean? I mean a sense of shame at acting shamefully and a sense of pride in acting well. Without this, nothing fine or great can be accomplished in public or in private.
Okay, let me fill this in.
Hmm.
Shame and pride. Shame and pride. So shame is this sense of embarrassment, it's a kind of a sense of guilt. You feel bad about yourself. And when do you feel shameful? When you've done the wrong thing. When do you feel pride? Well, he says it in acting well. You feel proud of yourself. You feel you have self-esteem when you do the right thing. We're not talking about bogus self-esteem. We're talking about real self-esteem. Like when you've done a hard thing and it's the right thing and you justifiably feel decent about yourself. Okay. So shame, fear of shame is going to deter you from doing the wrong thing, and desire to feel good about yourself is going to inspire you to do the right thing. And somehow this is going to be connected in with relationship, where you're going to feel these feelings that are going to motivate you for the sake of the other person to do the right thing. You want to keep going?
Yes. What I say is this: if a man in love is found doing something shameful or accepting shameful treatment because he is a coward and makes no defense, then nothing would give him more pain than being seen by the boy he loves, not even being seen by his father or his comrades. We see the same thing also in the boy he loves, that he is especially ashamed before his lover when he is caught in something shameful. If only there were a way to start a city or an army made up of lovers and the boys they love, theirs would be the best possible system of society, for they would hold back from all that is shameful and seek honor in each other's eyes.
Okay, let's pause this. States they would hold back or avoid all things that are shameful, and they would seek honor, to be honored in each other's eyes. What is this issue of shame and pride, or honor and shame? What does it have to do with love and doing the right thing? This is not unlike some of the things Aristotle raised about who you want judging you. Who do you want judging you in your life? Yeah, friends. And not just any friends, real friends, your best friends. And it's those friends whose opinion, not just you want judging you, but you're concerned to see your own self through their eyes. Yes, absolutely, Rukeya. So whose opinion do you care about the most? Yeah, the person you love. And here, there's nothing explicitly sexual about this love that he talks about here, right? So we want to back up from that discussion of physical attraction, because that actually doesn't seem to be what he's talking about here. So what is it? You're going to be deterred from doing the wrong, shameful thing because you never want to see the people you love view you doing the wrong thing and looking down upon you. You want to have a high opinion of yourself, and the way you're going to have a high opinion, self-esteem, is by doing the right thing and those other people recognizing it, thinking of you well, and when they think of you well, you're going to think well of yourself. Now, I know we're Americans and we all love this conception of I'm an individual and the only judge I really have is me. Or of course, we could talk about God, but Aristotle leaves God, Plato leaves God out of the discussion here, given he's a Greek. And he doesn't really conceive of the gods in that way as like worthy of our attention in this way. So despite our own individualistic tendencies, I think this is a very powerful point about our wholesome love for the right people, those people really close to us, really makes us concerned for their opinion of us. And we don't see ourselves just through our own eyes. We see ourselves through the eyes of those people we care about a lot, precisely because we respect their opinion in general, but then our opinion of us, right? And we want to be seen in the best light, obviously. You want to keep going, Rukeya?
Yeah. Even a few of them in battle side by side would conquer all the world, I would say. For a man in love would never allow his loved one of all people to see him leaving ranks or dropping weapons. He would rather die 1,000 deaths. And as for leaving the boy behind or not coming to his aid in danger, why? No one is so base that true love could not inspire him with courage and make him as brave as if he had been born a hero.
Okay, let's pause for a second. You have to understand the context he's talking about. He's talking about comrades. He's talking about leaving ranks or dropping weapons. I know this is the Greeks. We're in another world here. What does he talk about leaving ranks and dropping weapons? What context is he talking about here? And he means this quite literally when he talks about leaving ranks or dropping weapons. The ranks of what? What did he talk about up here? Literally an army made up of lovers. What is he talking about here? He's talking about lovers fighting side by side, right? And the reason they don't drop their ranks, which means run away, basically, and they don't drop or leave their ranks or drop their weapons, is because they're standing alongside the person they love, fighting not just some random cause, they're fighting for each other, right? And therefore they have courage because they want to be seen as doing the right thing, and their love for the other person inspires courage in them. Does anyone know what courage is, generally speaking? What kind of thing is courage for Aristotle and Plato? It's a willingness to die for the person you love. Courage is a moral virtue. What is happiness for Aristotle? Living virtuously. So we come back to his remarks up here about how love provides guidance for living well. Well, here what Phaedrus has just described is the way in which love, because of this issue of shame versus honor and pride, inspires courage, which is a moral virtue, which it inspires excellence in a human being. It's an inspiration to help us achieve happiness. True or false? Can love do this? We might put it this way. Love, our concern for the other person to be seen well in their eyes, inspires us to be the best person we can be. Here it's in the context of the military, in the context of the moral virtue of courage, but we might not have to speak. And what is courage? It allows us to overcome the fear of death. So people go out and fight for their loved one. They're willing to die for them, so on. It makes a lot more sense to me. I don't know if I could die for like Marxism or capitalism. Even dying for my country doesn't sound like thrilling, but dying for like my daughter or something in a meaningful way, not just like, you know, I wouldn't want to just kick off and it be for nothing. That'd be kind of worthless, but I could at least conceive of it, although I'd like to avoid that situation. You want to keep going, Rukeya?
Yes. So next page, Professor.
So when
Homer says a god breathed might into some of the heroes, this is really love's gift to every lover. Besides, no one will die for you but a lover, and the lover will do this even if she is the woman.
Okay, let's pause right there, because then he's going to go in to give examples, and I want to move to the next speech. So he gives examples from Greek mythology of situations where a lover was willing to die for their beloved. And he gives them a kind of accolade that this is a great human being because of the virtue they showed and their willingness to die for the one they love, right? I mean, this is pretty extreme, obviously, but I guess war is an extreme situation. But I mean, isn't there something to be said? The person who's, I mean, obviously willing to die for you, who would that be? I don't know, the person who would be willing to, I don't know, give you a kidney when they needed it or something like that. This isn't the kind of ordinary love we deal with on a daily basis. I mean, what we need to get by in the kind of routine of our world is definitely not the same as this. But this is something dramatic that I think one thing you can see here is just how powerful love can be. I mean, what thing in human life is so powerful that it'll actually makes you willing to die for someone else, right? I think that's what Plato's getting at here. Love can be, in certain circumstances, this powerful, right? All right, so let's move forward to Pausanias, and we'll get what we can get. But that's basically what Phaedrus has to say. He then backs up what he said there with examples that we don't need to look at. Rukeya, do you think you can keep going for us?
Yes, I can if there is no problem. Okay, so Phaedrus, I'm not quite sure our subject has been well defined. Our charge has been simple, to speak in praise of love. This would have been fine if love himself were simple too. But as a matter of fact, there are two kinds of love. In view of this, it might be better to begin by making clear which kind of love we are to praise. Let me therefore try to put our discussion back on the right track and explain which kind of love ought to be praised. Then I shall give him the praise he deserves as the God he is. It is a well-known fact that love and Aphrodite are inseparable. If therefore Aphrodite were a single goddess, there could also be a single love. But since there are actually two goddesses of that name, there also are two kinds of love. I don't expect you will disagree with me about the two goddesses, will you? One is an older deity, the motherless daughter of Uranus, the god of heaven. She is known as Urania, or heavenly Aphrodite. The other goddess is younger, the daughter of Zeus and Dion. Her name is Deimos,
Pandemos.
or common Aphrodite. It follows, therefore, that there is a common as well as a heavenly love, depending on which goddess is love's partner. And although, of course, all the gods must be praised, we must still make an effort to keep these two gods apart. The reason for this applies in the same way to every type of action considered in itself. No action is either good or bad, honorable or shameful. Take, for example, our own case. We had a choice between drinking, singing, or having a conversation. Now, in itself, none of this is better than any other. How it comes out depends entirely on how it is performed. If it is done honorably and properly, it turns out to be honorable. If it is done improperly, it is disgraceful. And my point is that exactly this principle applies to being in love. Love is not in himself noble and worthy of praise. That depends on whether the sentiments he produces in us are themselves noble.
Okay,
No-
okay, great, awesome. So what's he getting at here? Love is not good in and of itself. This is interesting because remember, this is a God. You're supposed to praise a God. You're not supposed to speak ill of a God. And as the text goes forward now, the eros as the God starts to disappear from the discussion, and you start to get eros as love, the human phenomena, more and more. He says love is not good or bad in and of itself. It's how it is performed, which is kind of funny depending on what you're thinking of there. But he says love is not noble or worthy of praise in and of itself. It has to do really with what kind of love it is. And that's something we talked about before. Can love provide guidance to achieve happiness? And we said yes, but it depends on what kind of, if it's just an impulsive desire that we would call unhealthy, you would say, no, it's not going to help us become happy. But if it's some type of higher form of love that manifests as a commitment, like, for example, the commitment Phaedrus describes, where people are actually so committed they're willing to die for one another and have that type of courage in the face of death, like then that's something noble, or at least Phaedrus presents that as something noble. Okay, so he's got two types of love now: heavenly love and common love. And there's a kind of class thing going on. Common means like what the normal little people do, and heavenly love is a kind of aristocratic type love. But that's a kind of secondary issue. What do you think he's talking about with these two types of love? Heavenly eros. He now says there's not one eros, there's two eros. There's heavenly and there's common. Anyone have an idea of what that distinction means, practically speaking? Yeah, he's going to describe one as good and one as bad. Absolutely. Heavenly is going to be good and common is going to be bad. Any other thoughts? He's talking about something that we're all going to be familiar with once we kind of decode what he's saying. and put it in ordinary language. Any other thoughts about what this distinction between heavenly and common love is? Ashley, any thoughts?
Heavenly love may be harder to obtain or to reach than common love.
I would agree.
Um,
That's good because common is like something probably pretty attainable because it's, well, it's common. That's good. Any other thoughts?
It's harder to achieve one from the other.
I think we just lost Luis. True versus fake, not quite. Okay, let's just get it out there. So heavenly love is probably what we would call like platonic love. The love of another person's soul, a kind of spiritual love, a love that's about the character of the other person, right? A non-sexual love. What is common Aphrodite or common love, pandemos? It's sexual desire. Sexual desire. And he's going to put down sexual desire and elevate this love that comes from the soul rather than the body, right? So when we talk about sexual desire versus heavenly love, we're basically talking about the one desire that seems to kind of emanate from the body for other bodies, and the one that emanates from a higher place, from the soul that is concerned with the soul of the other person, right? And this higher love, I think you could call it complete friendship. I'd say it's almost virtually identical. And of course, he's concerned, he claims to be concerned with the higher version, but I'm not sure. If you read his speech carefully, I'm not really convinced that he really, I think he's a bit of a hypocrite, right? Where he kind of says one thing, but really wants to do or be something else. But I'm not sure we're going to get that far into his speech. Ruqayyah, you want to keep going? He's going to explain it right here.
Yes, Professor. Now the common Aphrodite's love is himself truly common. As such, he strikes wherever he gets a chance. This, of course, is the love felt by the vulgar, who are attached to women no less than to boys, to the body more than to the soul, and to the least intelligent partner, since all they care about is completing the sexual act.
Okay. So this is about as explicit as they get. Talk about completing the sexual act. You can figure out what that is. So this is the love felt by the vulgar, and this is a vulgar form. It's a low form of love, and it's a desire for the body. And notice he, meaning Eros, strikes whenever he gets a chance, because this is, what is he describing here? He's describing the sexual impulse, that kind of impulsivity of sexual impulse that comes and goes. Even Aristotle, talking about young people falling in love, where he was describing this kind of fickle impulse they have, that's just a kind of like an animal thing that erupts in them that they don't really have much control over in a lot of ways. And what are they Sure. Ashley, you want to go?
Yes. We're starting at whether, correct?
Whether.
Okay. Whether they do it honorably or not is of no concern. That is why they do whatever comes their way. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, and which one is incidental to their purpose. For the love for who moves them belongs to a much younger goddess who through her parentage partakes of the nature, both of the female and the male.
Okay, so there's something really hilarious here. He's a guy who desires this same-sex relationship with a younger boy or a young man. It's kind of a boundary line there. And he's actually putting down heterosexual relationships. Actually, you follow all the politics of all this stuff today, you can kind of like relate it, because there's a lot of put down of like heterosexual people. Not that anybody decides what they want to be. That's just the way you're born. But he despises men and women. Got it, Luis. And here's one thing about the man and the woman. It's like nature has, go back to Aristotle and the couple, they come together out of necessity for procreation. So one of the interesting catches about the male-female relationship that he's denigrating, that he's kind of putting down here, is that in most societies up until the present, men and women have had to come together sexually to couple in order to produce children for society. And it's just a kind of natural obligation. And he wants to elevate love kind of above that mere kind of obligation. I mean, you have to understand the whole creation of the concept of romantic love. And I'm not saying like people had to invent it in books and in poetry before it existed in real life. But when you talk about the kind of spiritualizing or elevating of love above the obligations of society and the necessities of life, it's a fairly recent phenomena in human culture, and particularly in the last so many hundred years. I mean, some point in the Renaissance, and then later in the last couple hundred years, a decided emphasis on the emotional component and the spiritual component of a relationship over and above the kind of more basic business, the utility aspect of the relationship. All right, you want to keep going, Ashley?
Yes. Contrast this with the love of heavenly Aphrodite. This goddess, whose descent is purely male, hence this love is for boys, is considerably older and therefore free from the lewdness of youth. That's why those who are inspired by her love are attracted to the male. They find pleasure in what is by nature stronger and more intelligent. But even within the group that is attracted to handsome boys, some are not moved purely by this. Heavenly love, those who are do not fall in love with little boys. They prefer older ones whose cheeks are showing the first traces of a beard, a sign that they have begun to form minds of their own. I am convinced that a man who falls in love with a younger man of this age is generally prepared to share everything with the one he loves. He is eager, in fact, to spend the rest of his own life with him. He certainly does not aim to deceive him, to take advantage of him while he is still young and inexperienced, and then, after exposing him to uh,
Ridicule.
ridicule, move quickly on to someone else.
Okay. The older man would never take advantage of the younger man because that's not what he's really interested in. And he wouldn't use him and then dump him and then expose him to ridicule for being dumped and then move on quickly to know someone else. Because that's the whole depiction of the sexual impulse, that it's like this impulse. It comes and it goes, and here it is for one person, and 5 minutes later, there it is for another person. He talks about being with a young man who's a boy, who's on the verge of being a man, one with a mind of his own. Tell us, and I think you have to read between the lines. Let me be clear. Plato is not advocating for this relationship. He's characterizing a character, speaking about it from the character's perspective. I actually think Plato is critical of this relationship for the same reasons we would be. What's the problem with being not just with a younger person, but someone who is like underage? What's the problem? Why is that morally wrong, or at the very least, morally ambiguous?
Because morally, someone younger is seen as a child.
And what's okay, absolutely. And what's the problem? I'm going to ask you the tough question. What's the problem with that?
Inexperience or being naive.
It's connected with that. That's part of it. Absolutely. What's the problem of them being inexperienced and naive? Why is that a problem?
Because then they need guidance, or no?
They do need guidance, but they could also be what? With the person who's not so interested in giving them honest guidance.
Taken advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what he's insinuating here, that there's the risk of being taken advantage of with this age difference. Why do we talk about a young person being taken advantage of in a way that we don't someone who's a full adult? What's the problem there? It has something to do with inexperience. It also has something to do with something else that's kind of related to that. Has to do with forming their own mind. Why don't we let 12-year-olds vote? Why don't we let 14-year-olds drive cars?
No concept of perception or just inexperience.
It's not just inexperience, although the two are connected. We don't think in the same way of a 30-year-old being, quote, taken advantage of the way we would think of a 14-year-old being potentially taken advantage of by an older person. What do they not have apart from experience that they're lacking? What's something else that they're lacking? Has something to do with their mind. Why don't 12-year-olds vote? Yes, thank you, Rukeya. Maturity. I mean, the word to sum it up. So they lack their own mind. What do we mean? There is a stage of development that psychologists and thinkers about this have thought about for a very long time. It's not a new concept. It's not even a 20th century concept, but we still rely on it today, and it becomes the basis of the drinking age. It becomes the basis of the driving age, becomes the basis of the voting age, which is a human being reaches the age of reason where they can make difficult, decisions about difficult things that otherwise could be emotionally provocative for them. There's certain things, there's simply their minds have not developed enough to be able to handle the decision-making responsibility, right? If you think about the very concept of statutory rape, right? And what do we mean by that? An older person being with an underage person. Think about it. Even if that underage person says yes, the older person has still committed a crime. Even if the younger person consents, at least they try to consent, the older person is still technically considered a crime, right? Why is that? Because the younger person is not considered old enough to be able to give consent. Why? Because they're not mature enough. And by the time you become 18, which is this legal age of consent, among many other things, or I guess maybe it's someplace 16, whatever, you've then entered a world where you are now responsible for your own actions, and you're considered capable of giving that kind of consent to another human being. Right? So this is one of the basic problems that the younger person, even if they agree to enter a relationship like this, it's not really appropriate because they don't have the powers to really navigate this relationship and have the wherewithal to not be taken advantage of in one way. So therefore, I mean, in our society, it doesn't matter whether they say yes, right? They can't consent because they're not considered mature enough to be able to even do that, right? Okay. Let's read a little bit longer and we'll call it a night. Ashley, you go a little bit more?
Yes. Are we picking up as a matter of fact?
As a matter of fact, yeah.
As a matter of fact, there should be a law for forbidding affairs with young boys.
Let me just pause for a second. He'll use the word law and custom, and it's the Greek word nomos. And nomos can mean laws prohibiting and encouraging certain behavior. And nomos can also mean like the customs or the morals of the society. And we all know that with something like love and relationships, some of these things are a matter of law. Like we just talked about the age of consent, that's a matter of law. But then there are many, many boundaries that we have that hem in this desire called love that are not of the legal kind, they're of the moral kind. There's a whole set of rules, right? And we've kind of established a little bit why, because this is one of the most powerful desires people have. I suppose for each person, depending on what their eros is, it is the most powerful thing. Therefore, it needs boundaries to be regulated, because it can be a kind of crazy thing. It needs to be kind of trained. And so he's going to talk about the relationship between rules and customs and love and how it's carried out. You want to keep going?
Yes. If nothing else, all this time and effort would not be wasted on such uncertain pursuit. And what is more uncertain than whether a particular boy will eventually make something of himself, physically or mentally? Good men of 15 course are willing to make a law like this for themselves, but those other lovers, the vulgar ones, need external restraint. For just this reason, we have placed every possible legal obstacle to their seducing our own wives and daughters. These vulgar
We
love.
could just go a little bit over from 9:30. If we could just hang for about 10 more minutes. Look, there's a law against adultery and seducing the wives and daughters. We talked a little bit in this society, everybody has a wife, but they were very strict about prohibiting adultery, right? Why do you need laws prohibiting adultery? Laws preventing men from going after young girls like daughters? Why do you need laws like that?
So people don't do it.
Yeah, and why? But
Oh,
what does that say about the fact that they would do it if there weren't the law?
their morals.
It could be. That's right. Let's just put it this way. Pausanias here is acknowledging just how powerful Eros is, that it's so powerful, people can't control themselves through their own internal regulation, their own self-restraint. They need external restraint. They need laws to control them. And why is that? Yeah, it could be some people are less moral, but it's also just a more general acknowledgement of how powerful this impulse is, and that society really needs to constrain, if it's going to manifest in the right way, in a way that's positive, in a way that's going to make people happy, it's got to be restrained with all these regulations and rules. We got to engage in a little bit of repression, right? This raises this great question about like 1960s and free love, and they all just want to go and do whatever they want and sleep with whoever they want, and like this whole conception that came out of a certain segment of the 60s where like everyone thought everything would be fine if you just ripped all the rules off of love and let people do whatever they damn well, whatever their impulse told them. Which is interesting because today we're definitely not there. I'm not sure that experiment worked out too well, the free love movement. It always costs something. All right, you want to keep going, Ashley?
Yes. These vulgar lovers are the people who have given love such a bad reputation that some have gone so far as to claim that taking any man as a lover is in itself disgraceful. Would anyone make this claim if he weren't thinking of how hasty vulgar lovers are, and therefore how unfair to their loved ones? For nothing done properly and in accordance with our customs would ever have provoked such righteous disapproval. I should point.
Okay, let me just say one thing very briefly. So now he's going to talk about the customs, by which he means the rules, and he could mean also the laws of different societies in the ancient world that he's familiar with. And he's going to talk about how the different rules manifest in different types of relationships between people. And he, at the end here, you see toward the bottom of the page, he's actually going to talk about the Persian Empire and how their rules actually forbid people from forming love relationships. So what he's talking about here is like how the political and the moral level of society impacts our most intimate relationships and our most intimate desires. Now, we typically think of things like love and sex and all this world behind closed doors as something totally private that the rest of the world has no business about, and it's totally separate from politics. The point he's making, however, is that they're never completely separate. And the way the public sphere shapes your understanding of love and sex, it influences you behind closed doors. Look, if you're paying attention today of all our discussion about sexual orientation and beyond and beyond and beyond and beyond, and what is taught in schools and blah, 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 you can see that this connection between politics on the one hand and our own sexuality is actually intimately connected, right? Okay, you keep going, Ashley?
I should point out, however, that although the customs regarding love in most cities are simple and easy to understand, here in Athens and in Sparta as well, they are remarkably complex. And places where the people are inarticulate,
They don't speak well.
like Ellis or
Boeotia.
Yep. Tradition straightforwardly approves taking a lover in every case. No one there, young or old, would ever consider it shameful. The reason I suspect is that being poor speakers, they want to save themselves the trouble of having to offer reasons and arguments in support of their suits.
Okay, what the heck is he talking about here? Inarticulate, speaking poorly. I think he's basically saying this. In Athens, when it comes to love, we have a very sophisticated and complex society about it. We transmute through the rules the sexual impulse into something that's more about the soul. And we don't allow for easy sex. It's basically what he seems to be saying. There's no free love in Athens. He says in Ella and Boeotia, he says you can take a lover in any situation and you don't have to, he says, talking about offering reasons and arguments to support their suits. I think what he's talking about is the process of courting somebody. Courting mean trying to entice them into a relationship, right? In Athens, there are many sophisticated boundaries and procedures. If you want to court someone, you have to abide by them, and you have to know how to negotiate them. Whereas in Boeotia, it's kind of like free love. If you want to like go find someone for a night, you go and find them and nobody cares, right? But you can see how Athens rules. I think what he's saying here, Athens rules encourages a higher form of love. It encourages a love based on the soul, whereas without the rules in these other societies, it reduces love to sex. And this comes back to this basic distinction he's made between heavenly love, which is a higher, more soul-based love or platonic love, and common love, which is just sexual desire. And as we've seen with friendship based on pleasure, sexual desire is not really about the other person. It's just about the pleasure that their body can provide for a period of time. And then you walk away because you didn't care about them. You just cared about getting that impulse satisfied, scratching that itch, and completing the act and moving on. All right, you want to keep going, Ashley?
Yes. By contrast, in places like Ionia,
yep.
Ionia, and almost every other part of the Persian Empire, taking a lover is always considered disgraceful. The Persian Empire is absolute. That is why it condemns love as well as philosophy and sport. It is no good for rulers if the people they rule cherish ambitions for themselves or form strong bonds of friendship with one another. That these are precisely the effects of philosophy, sport, and especially of love is a, gotta scroll up a little bit.
Oh, is a lesson.
Love is a lesson. Yeah, I can't see the rest of the words on my screen.
I think you got to scroll because I've got it on mine.
Oh,
Oh, now I flipped the page. Oh my goodness, now I've gone.
okay. Love is a lesson the tyrants of Athens learned directly from their own experience. Didn't their reign come to a dismal end because of the bonds uniting Harmodius and
Harmodius and Aristogeiton in love and affection. Awesome, great. So these are actually two characters who were had a kind of brotherly love, who overthrew a tyrant in Athens. Okay, let me step back for a second. What the heck is he talking about now? The Persian Empire, before there was the Roman Empire, before there was Alexander's empire, there was the Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire was the largest empire in the known world, right? And it was a tyranny, meaning no freedom. And the people of the society were treated as subjects or servants or slaves. They did not have liberties as we would understand them. And a tyranny, they have to control the society, right? So what did they do to control the society? They prevented people from developing love relationships with one another, including discouraging love itself, and also various activities through which, like sports, and in his case, philosophy, we might not think of that, but Plato does, of activities that form strong bonds between human beings. If you're a ruler in a tyranny, what's the problem of allowing your society to form strong bonds between themselves? Why do they not want to let that happen?
Enter, mute, currently unmute.
Like they will become one, and then they will fight against the dictator.
Very good. Because based on the very simple principle that we're all familiar, a revolt. And that's exactly what these characters, Harmodius and Aristogeiton, did. They united to revolt against the tyrant of Athens. And the whole story, it's a bit of a myth, but it's a historical story. It's actually a historical story. It's based on fact that their love and affection brought them together to overthrow the tyrant, right? And it's all based on a principle we all know and understand, which is that united people are strong and divided people are weak. And when they're weak, you can control them, keep them in their place, keep them subordinate, keep them submissive. So what does the Persian Empire do? It does everything it can to discourage love and literally love relationships between human beings. And in a sense, you could think outlaw, right? Divide and conquer, right, is what we're really talking about. Dividing people not by race, gender, class, like we do in our society, but dividing them from forming strong bonds. And what happens? They have loyalty to one another rather than loyalty to the ruler who's above them. Think about, for example, so living under the Persian tyranny is being almost a slave, not quite. But in a sense, you're trying to keep the people in a form of slavery to control them, submission, right? In the South, prior to the Civil War, when there was slavery in the United States, they used the exact same strategy to control the slaves, divide and conquer, and prevent them from developing proper love relationships. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? We'll finish with this and we'll call it a night. What did they do to the slaves to prevent the slaves from revolting against their masters?
they separated them.
Separated who specifically?
They separated men from women, and they separated, I guess, just people relating to a nuclear family. Like they just
Yes, and that's very well put, the nuclear family. Now we're told today that like the nuclear family is something old and out of date. But it's hard to get around the fact that the nuclear family is a product of love. love for two people. I mean, most of the time it's a man and a woman, but it doesn't have to be. And then they produce a child or they have a child, whatever, how it works today. And they're all bound together in loyalty to one another because they love one another. And historically, the family has always been considered the building block of a healthy society. And, there are people today, feminists starting in the 60s who would like attack the family as being patriarchal and all this stuff. But I mean, Aristotle talks about the origins of the family. It starts out with people procreating and having children, and they're all connected. They're all tethered together in their destiny. If you read the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, a man who was a slave until about the 1830s and then ran away from Maryland to the New York area and became one of the most important abolitionist thinkers, and really just one of the most important thinkers and writers in American history. He talks about how he didn't know who his mother was. And his whole identity was stripped from him because he didn't know who his family was. And he really wasn't aware of it later until he really understood what family relationships even were, because he didn't have them. He didn't know who his father was, right? He had an idea about who his mother, what it might have been, but the whole strategy was to separate the family, either by selling them off or by simply not acknowledging that they were even related to begin with, not letting a mother parent a child beyond, like, say, infancy, when it's like breastfeeding, as a simple way of divide and conquer. The tyrants want control. Now let's just finish with this thought. That's slavery and before the Civil War, before, the 1860s. There are all kinds of things in our society today that are devised to work in the same way. There's all kinds of laws that actually, instead of encouraging family units, actually discourages family units. Our media, our pop culture, our certainly all our political gobbledygook is so predicated on dividing us in so many ways. And I think you should ask yourself, like, what is the goal of the fomenting of all these divisions? Because I keep, every time I look at the news and I see, oh, the person on the left and the person on the right, and this is the black person, and this is the white person, and this is the gay person, and this is the straight person, I sit to myself and say, the people I see in my everyday life, the people I see on my street or on the street, like, they're all different too. There's a black person, there's a white person, there's a girl, there's a boy, there's a straight person, there's a gay person. And to me, I don't think that the ordinary people care about these differences nearly as much as the media and the political class promotes divisions based on these lines. And you should ask yourself, like, are they simply reflecting fissures and divides in our society, right? Like, obviously there are tensions from our history, right? There are tensions between men and women because women, their social position in society has evolved radically in the last 100 years. African Americans, 150, 170, 60 years ago were enslaved, right? Obviously, there's a history there that our country is constantly confronting, or not confronting, as the case may be. But, well, I don't want to say, there's a lot of things I could say, but think about what is being done to our society in terms of the way everything's conceived as a conflict between, it's always two groups that are in conflict with one another. And you wonder how much of this stuff is like real, like it's just a reflection of what's in our society, or whether it's actually trying to pit us against one another, right? And of course, everybody's experience is different. Everybody lives in a different, obviously there are things discussed in the news that are divisions that are very real and very serious and that aren't being just, but some of even the real ones can be exploited too, right? Anyway, and then you ask yourself, are they doing it to help control us and keep us in a, like, I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, and we all want to go because it's way too late, but who are the people who are really, I have my opinions about the people who are really causing the problems in our country, and I don't think they're the people next to me. We're all the little people. We're like, working class, middle class, what have you. I think the people who are the real problem are the people who are upstairs. The people who are above us. Yeah, some version of Big Brother. The people who are pumping out the message of division. And those people are the powerful people. The people who are in control of the media, the people who are in control, the political class in control of our politics to a great extent. On and on. We can touch on this a little more. Okay, so 1984, this is a segue and then good night. In 1984, it's a tyranny. Big Brother is in control. That's the name of the political leader in 1984. And the only emotion that is promoted between human beings in that world is hate, right? And the love relationship, they try to obliterate it. And what's the main reason they do this? In order to control the people. And what's so beautiful about 1984, well, that's maybe not the right word, but what's so ingenious is about how Orwell shows how this regime that's trying to control people, how it reaches into their psychology about their most intimate things like eros. That's the most, you could say that's the most intimate thing of someone, however it manifests with them. And it tries to control it and undermine it and undermine people's natural tendency toward bonding with one another in the same way that's being described at the Persian Empire. This text being written over 2,000 years ago and Orwell's text being written, published in 1948, I think, so not, relatively speaking, not that long ago. We never think of our own intimate feelings and relationships in political terms, but I think we should consider the extent to which they really are influenced by these larger public movements going on. Think about the role that pornography plays in our society and whether that's healthy for fomenting. I mean, I'm like a liberal, open-minded person in that regard. I'm not like a Puritan who thinks it should be banned or something. On the other hand, like, does it assist or does it do the opposite in terms of, establishing wholesome relationships between people that would be, yeah. All righty. Questions, thoughts, comments before we go here?
I'd say something after class.
All right, you got to say something after class. All righty. That could be a debate about what? Pornography?
Yeah, how it if it could be like, I don't know word for word what you said, but how it can either like aid or take away from a relationship. It can go both ways, in a sense.
Yeah, it could. Yeah. I think yeah, that's a question for another time though. All right. So with that, everybody have a great night. And Luis, if you need to chat, let's chat.
Have a great night, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, Professor. Good night.
Good night.
Do you have class next week, Professor?
No class next week.
All right, thank you.
Meeting room.